Welcome to Childcare Conversations with Kate and Carrie.
All right, directors. Every day we get phone calls, we get emails. We are always having some struggle between the director and the staff. So today we're going to try to give you some help. We're going to talk about 5 different things that you can do that your staff need from you, right? So this is what you can do to help them. So Carrie, when I talk about what your teachers need from you, what's the first thing that pops into your mind?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is clear expectations. That's the first thing that pops into my mind, because a lot of times when we're having challenges supporting our staff, or they're having challenges doing what we need them to do, it's because they don't get it. They don't understand what we're asking of them. We say, we need you to close down your classroom at the end of the day. And they're like, cool. They turn off the light and they walk out of the door. And so they've closed the classroom. So you haven't maybe been super clear with your expectations. I think that happens a lot of times. And other times we see such potential in them and we're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be my new lead teacher in the 2-year-old room. Just give them 6 months to like marinate in the program and then they're going to be ready. But did you explain that expectation to them and say, I see such potential in you. I can see you quickly moving into a lead teacher role. So I think setting high expectations and explaining them. But I mean, I feel like you also have some different thoughts about expectations than those that I just ran through.
I mean, I actually think mine would be a whole separate one, which is within those expectations is a boundary. So I feel like a lot of times I have staff who have their own expectation of me. And I'm not going there. So, for example, kind of like you use the example of closing down a room for the day. Well, I would have that same expectation, but I feel like on some levels, sometimes I end up with teachers who think it's my job to clean their room or to clean the program as an owner or as a director. And so I feel like having that boundary of this is what I'll do, but this is what I need you to do is really, really important. Along with,
I think
go ahead.
sometimes people get confused about that word boundary because they think they're setting a boundary about what someone else is supposed to do. And we know that that's not a boundary, because a boundary is about what you're going to do, you as the person setting the boundary. So
that's so true. I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, my favorite is when you talk about setting budgets as boundaries, specifically related to red construction paper. You know, it's that time of year, everybody wants a flag. So the red, white, and blue construction paper. And, you know, I think a boundary that's easy for us to think of as, hey, you get X amount.
Right.
You know,
or,
and,
you know, this is the amount of red construction paper that we are buying for this 6 months. And so if you've got a 6 months that starts in July and ends in December, and you use up all of the red construction paper for fireworks and 4th of July themed things, and then you're not going to have any available for Christmas, and they're going to be super grumpy when they try to make Santa and they're out of red construction paper. So I think the boundary is, this is how much construction paper we're buying for the second half of the year. You need to work with the team to determine how you guys are going to parse that out. And it's not the director's job, in my opinion, for the director to outline how much construction paper you get to use which month in which classroom. That should be a team decision within the teaching staff. Like, that is not a monkey that you should be taking on. That is a monkey that the teaching staff need to have. You have allotted $1,000 for construction paper because it's a nice round number and we like a nice round number. And they told you how many reams of which color. So they came up with the color separation. Cool. We got that handled. Another boundary might be related is, I don't know if it's a boundary, if it's an expectation, you give the teachers maybe a classroom petty cash. So that if there's something that they want, that they didn't get their supply list in before the purchase time, they can go out and get it and they'll get reimbursed as long as, it stays at the school. I love it when they ask for something, we pay for it out of the petty cash, and then they try to take that book with them when they leave the school because they're like, it's my book. I bought it off of Amazon. And you're like, yes. And you brought me the receipt and I paid you back. That's mine. So to me, there's the expectation from me as the owner or the director that I'm going to give them a way to have some flexibility. So that petty cash. But then there's the boundary of, if I paid for the thing, it belongs to the school. So I think those boundaries and expectations really go together, those two things.
Well, and right along with even, support and resources, you can tie all three of those into what my favorite topic, which is I'm going to call in sick because I don't feel good because I had too much fun on Thursday night. And I know you have a really, what I think is a unique perspective when thinking about how staff can work together to figure out how to cover vacations and days off. But I think that there has to be clear expectations and a process. You can support them. You can give them the resources. I will be one boundary is that that's not my job.
We know lots of directors who feel like it is their number one job is making sure that all the classrooms are clean, are not clean, covered. Yep. So yes, for Kate and I, we both have the boundary that you're going to find coverage for your classroom, but we supply the resources, which means that they have a chart of when everybody is working, because we believe you should have a fair amount of part-time staff so that you've got more flexibility in your budget. And also we make sure that there are always at least 2 substitutes that we have under contract. And if we don't have any substitutes on contract, then we have contracted with a company that will provide substitutes, because there are times where it is really hard to hire. And so during those times, we have to have a contract with what I call the really expensive substitute service. And Kate and I know about how expensive it is because we used to run a substitute service. And that's also why we know it is a worthwhile investment to have a contract with a substitute service, because that is giving your staff the resources to be able to figure out how to cover their shift when they decided to have a good time on Taco Tuesday and $5 margaritas, and they had plenty of $5 margaritas and not enough tacos. So they're not making it to work on Wednesday, but it should be, in Kate's and my programs, that is always the staff person's responsibility. But because I've given them the resource of other people on staff who have a part-time schedule, and then the substitutes. And if we don't have the substitutes, we've also got the substitute service. So they've got 3 layers that they can go through to get their classroom covered. So that is the way we handle it. And I totally get that if that doesn't work in your budget and it's all about you as the director managing it, you still have the resource. You need to have the resources to cover that classroom. So you still have to have the resources for those teachers so that they feel like they have to come in when they are feeling unwell, when they are burned out mentally, or when they have put too many chemicals in their body.
I think that, with that starts at the very beginning, right? We know that expectations and boundaries and that support happens on day one. But what if you're listening to this podcast, Carrie, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they made a really good point. I need to start doing that. How do you just up and decide that you're going to put in a boundary, or you're going to be clearer on expectations or create a resource? So if you're new to listening to this podcast and any of the examples we just used, what would be something that a director could do to start today?
Just put on their big girl pants and start today. You don't need to notify the world that you grew a spine. Like there's no need to announce it to the world. But when we're having the one-on-one interactions and we're telling them about the support that is available. So we talked about they want supplies. And up till now, what you've been doing is they say, oh, I need more red construction paper. And we're going onto the school's Amazon account and we're overnighting some construction paper. Then we have a one-on-one conversation with that person who says, hey, I want to have more construction paper. And you say, well, what has happened is that this has messed up our budget and made it harder for us to bring on floaters or whatever has been the pinch point in your budget, or in your time budget. Because if you're going to Amazon 15 times a day because people didn't put stuff on the supply list, then you don't have time to get your actual ding dang job done. So it can start with a one-on-one conversation with one teacher and say, we've been not following the procedures, and I'm sorry that you're the one who's going to have to feel this first, but effective today, we're going to follow the procedures. And the procedures are, you've got to get it in by the 15th of the month. We will order by the 22nd of the month, so it will be here by the end of the month. And if you need something before that happens, we've got this petty cash system, and each classroom gets $20 a month for supplies that they might need throughout the month. It doesn't roll over. You get $20 for the month, or maybe you have a rollover. It's up to you guys, right? But you have that conversation with that one teacher, and then they're going to complain. You're taking it out all out on me. And you say, no, this is going to be across the board for everyone, because we've got to be supportive of our staff. And part of being supportive of them is expecting them to be grown-ups. I mean, grown-ups make a shopping list and don't go to the grocery store when they're hungry. Because if you go to the grocery store when you're hungry, you come home with half of the Hostess aisle.
Hey, quit calling me out on that.
So I think you can do it as send out a memo to everybody in a communication app. You can do it by calling a meeting, or you can do it, make the announcement to the staff person who is the most likely to show up in your office with this issue. They're then going to complain about it to everyone, and then you've disseminated the information and you didn't have to have a lot of conversations. There's an advantage to telling the loudest gossiper in your staff about a change in policy. They'll do all the disseminating of the information for you.
Okay, well, that I don't know if that necessarily feeds into number 4, which is listening to staff. So as a director, the one thing that you can do, and this also, it does take a lot of boundary pieces, which is listening. Now, sometimes that listening is about personal issues, about children, about parents, about coworkers. And as a reformed monkey chaser, I want you to just remember that there's a boundary. It's listening. I didn't say listen and go do, listen and go fix. It's just listening. Carrie likes to do this. And so if you can't see me,
close my lips.
Yeah. Like, you can't see me because you're listening to me because it's a podcast. I am, grabbing my fingers and closing my mouth. And so I really think that if you could do nothing, you're listening to this and you're going, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Oh, I want to take all the, all that responsibility. That's all my job. And that's your perception. Hopefully this one is one you can start tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think when we're giving them a listening ear, we also need to do that within boundaries. And we need to say, okay, it sounds like we need to talk. Let me set the timer for 15 minutes. Let me step out and do whatever you do to your office so that people know that this is Tiger Time. If you don't know about Tiger Time, go get our book, From Overwhelmed to I Got This. We talk about Tiger Time and explain what it is. We don't have time for that right now, but do something to the outside of your office to let people know it's Tiger Time. Set a timer for 15 minutes and then go, I am all yours for 15 minutes. And that way they know that you actually are listening to them and you are focusing on them, and it's showing them so much respect, as opposed to if you're like, okay, well, let's talk about it for a couple minutes. And then you're interrupted by the intercom going out off 47 times in 5 minutes. And then they don't get that listening ear that they really need. So letting people know that it's Tiger Time. So you're turning off the intercom. Nobody can stick their head into the office because this is Tiger Time, and you really have to not be interrupted because you're supporting them by listening to whatever, talking about behavioral issues in the classroom, or talking about something in their personal life, or their challenge with a coworker. And you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk. And it's hard, especially when at 2 sentences in, you're like, I can fix this. But they're not asking for you to fix it in the first 2 sentences. Once they do that first, we call it verbal vomit. You can call it whatever you want, but Kate and I call it verbal vomit. That first bleh, here's all the information. Once they get that out, then you can say, okay, before we go any further, do you want me to listen, help problem solve, or do you just want me here to hug you when you're done? Because those are 3 different ways of listening. Because if they want problem solving at the end, then you got to keep some time at the end of that 15 minutes. If they just need to vent, cool, they just need to vent. And if they need comfort, then again, we're going to need some time at the end for the comfort. So we've got to know after they do the verbal vomit, which of the 3 things are we doing? Are we venting? Are we problem solving? Or are you needing comfort?
Absolutely. So we've listened, we've set boundaries, we have given them some resources, we have been very clear, hopefully, in our expectations of what we want. So to me, I mean, you kind of said it earlier when you were talking about just, fixing the shades and the door and the windows and whatever, and that respect. And I think that number 5, absolutely, without a doubt, has to be, whether you call it respect, having their back, being their defense system. So maybe you can get up that sports analogy and maybe you're a blocker of some sort. But I think that as a director, your teachers need to know and trust that you will do what is within the expectations and within the boundaries, and that you are going to be there with support and resources. But if it's a parent or a child or just their life, you've got them.
Yeah, because a lot of times your staff doesn't want to tell you when there's a problem with a parent, because they're going to choose the parent over me because the parent pays them and they have to pay me. So if they think that there's a possibility, if there's a conflict between a staff member and a parent, that you're going to pick the parent's side, you need to disabuse them of that immediately, because it is way cheaper to replace a parent than it is to replace a quality staff person.
Absolutely.
They need to know that even if they did something stupid, and we all know that sometimes our staff do something stupid, but if they did something stupid, we're going to defend them to the parents, to licensing, to the other staff person. And then once we have calmed the situation down, then we're going to turn to them and go, that was stupid. And here are the 5 things, what are 5 things you, teacher, can do to repair the situation? We're going to have that expectation of them that they repair the situation. we're not going to give them all the answers because that's not really fixing it. But we're going to have their back and be there to support them and go, no, it is absolutely appropriate, blah, 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 blah. And then you can turn around and go, okay, from a parent's perspective, it is appropriate that you, I don't know, told them that Santa Claus wasn't real. But once the parent is out of the office, then you turn to the staff person and go, what were you thinking? Telling that 9-year-old kid that Santa doesn't exist, that was not your place. And so what are you going to do to repair the relationship with that parent? Right. But you, in front of the parents, were like, your 9-year-old child asked a question. My staff person did not want to lie. And so answered honestly. So we're going to defend the staff person to the parent, but then we're going to turn around and say, I expect you to repair this relationship.
You know what? I'm sitting here listening to you, and I feel like, a lot of times directors think they don't get the opportunity to practice these skills. And I really feel like all 5 of these that we just talked about, people should be using every day, right? Like we should be using this with our interactions with teenagers, with spouses, with coworkers, with friends, and just with even, strangers. So as a director, if you have listened to the 5, so I'm just going to repeat them. Tell me if I missed one, Carrie.
Okay.
Expectations, being clear what you expect from somebody. Ask for what you want. Boundaries, know what you should do, what they should do. Don't be fuzzy about that. Giving them support and resources to get something done if you expect them to do it. Listening, and respect. I mean, think about how much different the whole world would be if we all did that all the time, because I feel like we just wrote a job description for an awful lot of management leadership roles within communities, within businesses. I'm like, it's almost like a job description maybe for like, somebody of a faith organization. I mean,
I think our elected leaders should read this.
Like I said, imagine what life might be like if all of us did this. I mean, I keep thinking that had I somehow practiced this more before my kids all became teenagers, that perhaps maybe those teenagers would have been a little less rocky. I tried. I did not learn them well. But with the best of intent, and I don't think I ever did anything that was malicious, but I definitely didn't learn the boundary one well. I decided I was going to be the one to fix everything, instead of creating those resources and tools. But y'all don't need to know
I think
that.
there are, when you step into the director role, you probably haven't had 50 different bosses to learn from. And so you don't have 50 different bosses, some who were good at their job and some who were lousy. And I think this is a shortfall for me. I didn't have a lot of bosses before I became a boss, because I became a boss at 23. Actually, I guess I first became a boss when I was like 22. And one of the best ways to become a good boss is to look at other people who are bosses and who does it well and who does it poorly. And you can even look at the same boss over time. The head of Disney, how he is supporting his staff now versus how he used to, very different. And you would think he would get better, but he's gotten worse. People are less excited to work for Disney or Pixar now than they were when he was a relatively new head of the company, because they're doing stuff like what they've done as far as compensation for the actors in Inside Out 2. Sorry, we are Disney fans and we know way too much about Disney. Didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but feel free to look that up. What did they pay Mindy Kaling, and what did they pay the lead actress, and why was that so different? Anyway, so you may have been a great boss 3 weeks ago, and this week your ability to come to people's defense is in the trash. So listening to this episode hopefully reminded you of those 5 key things that the teachers need from you, and step back up on your hobby horse and get there. And if you haven't had a lot of experience as a boss, there are 100 documentaries probably on Netflix or Amazon or whatever streaming service you have about organizations. And so if you want to go watch one about, Fleetwood Mac, a rock and roll band from Kate's and my high school years, right? There are videos about how that group was managed. And so it doesn't matter what your area of interest is.
I mean, you could go watch Elvis. Come on. I mean,
yes, you can watch Elvis. Absolutely.
And there's lots of sports reference ones as well.
Yeah, the Michael Jordan documentary, I would personally recommend that you watch about once a month because I love it. But go watch some documentaries about companies or about public figures, and you will learn a lot about good bosses and bad bosses.
So I'm not going to toot our own horn, but I am a little. So there are over 210 episodes at the time you're listening to this, which means that although we aren't necessarily the best bosses, we will be able to give you some perspective and a lot of ideas that you may not have ever even had to deal with yet. So start on episode 1, go do some, whatever, what is that called? Binging. There we go.
Binging. I mean, I think I was a pretty good boss. I mean, if you don't think you were a good boss, that's on you, Kate. I think we were both pretty good bosses.
I think we've gotten better, and I think
nobody
we've been
is
able to
perfect
tell a lot
at
of
it.
horror stories. Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody's perfect at it, and we're not asking you to be perfect. We're just try to think of these 5 things and maybe even do an inventory sheet. At the end of the week, do a self-reflection. We ask the teachers to do reflective practice. We need to do reflective practice as well. We want them to go back and look at their lesson plan and what worked and what didn't work. We, as the leaders, need to do some reflective practice at the end of the week. Did you do this or did you not? Hey, Kate, can you make them a checklist? And we have a little freebie for that. Can I delegate that?
We'll see how much I get on my list. But yes, I think I love the idea. And so if you were a journaler or a to-do lister, or you have some way that you keep track of things, you know what? This might even be an awesome opportunity that if you think you did a good job that week, that you turn around and send yourself a voicemail that says, hey, I did a good job this week. And you can toot your own horn, even if it's just leaving yourself a voicemail. Yep.
So in the show notes, there will be a link to this form that I've just had Kate, I've told Kate she has to create. And so you can go in and download that little self-reflection piece and do it once or twice and see if it gives you any value. I think my reflections at the end of the week in my journal are one of the best parts of me, how I get better from week to week.
I think that's great.
I do not good.
But with that, hopefully you found something that was interesting to you or a piece of content that you can use and even use tomorrow. So with that, we hope that we'll see you guys next week. If you like it, share it. Carrie, what else do they have to do?
Send us ideas for topics you would like covered in the future. And what's that email address? The
info.childcareconversations@gmail.com.
Okay, we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Childcare Conversations with Kate and Carrie. Want to learn more? Check out our website at texasdirector.org. And if you've learned anything today, leave us a comment below and share the show.